I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Patrick Macmanus, Dr. Death creator and showrunner, and also who created The Girl from Plainville. There's so much to talk about, Patrick. First of all, as the saying goes, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And I got a sense that you pretty much agree with this. So what attracts you to these true horror stories like Dr. Death and, of course, like The Girl from Plainville?
First of all, thank you very, very much for this. I really appreciate you taking the time. I would say that I'm going to give you an answer that every writer gives, and I feel like a lot of people hear it and then go, "That's a load of BS," but it really is the truth. Which is, I genuinely. So first of all, I since I was a very young kid, I was attracted to horror. It was my favorite genre. I have a great story that is a very long story that we don't have time for, but the end of the story is that my mom got called into the principal's office when I was in the 5th grade, which is how old my eldest son is right now, because and the nun said, "Do you know what your son was reading at lunch today?" And my mom thought for a second. She goes, "Well, unless I'm mistaken, it's Stephen King's Misery, right?" So at the age of 11, I was reading Stephen King's Misery. So I have an affinity for the genre, but more than that, and I think actually probably comes from my love affair of Stephen King, I was genuinely attracted to the characters, and specifically when you're dealing with true crime, so often you're dealing with the for lack of a more reductive term, the cops and robbers aspect of it, right? And in the case of Dr. Death, we didn't have any police, we didn't have military, right? We had these 2 doctors who were chasing one of their own, who genuinely couldn't figure out for the life of them how one of their own could do this to their patients, right? So they became the cops, and that to me was a very novel way into a true crime story. And then on the flip side of it, we had Christopher Dunst, who very easily, bad guys in horror films too often are 2-dimensional, or at best 2.5-dimensional. And what we set out to write for Christopher Dunst was a character that the audiences, when they were watching the show, might actually catch themselves feeling empathy for him and catch themselves, right? Because when I say that, there's a danger in people interpreting that as me saying that he got the short end of the stick. No, Christopher Dunst deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life. But there is no question that had he chosen a different path, had he turned left instead of right, had he stayed on the research path instead of going down the surgical path, we might have been talking about him in a very different way today. And that is a tragic character, still a character who deserved what he got, but a tragic character because there was a possibility for him to be able to lead a different life. And that always to me is a compelling thing, when your villain is someone that you can find a connection to. It makes them almost that much more terrifying. And if we're not for Josh's portrayal, the writers that I had the pleasure of working with, myself as well, like, we wrote as best as we could, but if it weren't for Josh's performance, I don't think that character would have popped the way that he did. Josh, I keep saying it, he's been on the scene for 30 years, for 3 decades, and this to me was a revelatory performance.
I totally agree. I mean, I've been a fan of his since Fringe, and I was so happy when I realized, I was honestly, it's so exciting to talk to him. When he came on board, obviously, the actor who was going to play Dunch had to bow out. He came on board, and I thought, that's genius, because this guy, Josh Jackson, is he's an everyman. He's got this quality about him. He's charismatic, and I just love the way you, the team, and him were able to create this character who gave us these unsettling glimpses into his relatability. He doesn't quite understand, perhaps at first, what he's doing, that he's hurting people. So how did that happen, that you were able to land on this very magnetic actor like Josh Jackson, who really elevates the whole series?
My entire career, and I've said this for years, and I will say it until the day I die, my entire career has been layered in luck. I can literally point at the main points in my career and say, had this happened instead of this, I wouldn't be where I am. And that was on multiple occasions. Josh is another one. I want to begin by saying that Jamie Dornan was an extraordinary partner for the time that we had the opportunity to work together. I had a great and it was funny and slightly uncomfortable experience at the Critics' Choice Awards, where I was at the table with Josh and Jody and Slater and my wife, and Jamie was sitting one table over for Belfast. And I turned to Josh and I said, Josh, I'm going to go cheat on you for a second. And Josh looks over and he goes, just this once. And so I got an opportunity to catch up with Jamie at the Critics' Choice Awards. And I told Jamie the same thing. I said, Jamie, is Josh looking at us right now? And he goes, nobody should. So I had a pleasure to work for a period with two great actors. And so I'm very appreciative of the time that Jamie lent to us. But basically, when Jamie had to pull out because of COVID and because of timing, in order to actually go and prep Belfast, we went and looked everywhere, right, for who we should replace him with. And it was my wife and I watched When They See Us. And Josh had a small but pivotal role in that show. It was brilliant. I had never seen him like that before. And I went to the studio the next day and said, Josh is the one that I want. And then, they were obviously supportive. I mean, they all knew it was a boon if we could land him. And Josh and I met for two-hour sessions, 2 days in a row. And he said yes. You'd have to ask him, maybe you did, why he said yes. I can tell you, I go back to the beginning of my answer, which is that I was just lucky. And I look back now, and I mean this with all due respect to Jamie, that I now can't imagine this role being played by anybody else. And so to be able to work, and Josh is also he's grotesquely intelligent. He is ridiculously funny. He lent an air of not just professionalism, but levity to the set every day. And we were one of the early shows during COVID. That was not an easy period. And he picked up the baton and he led the way every single day. And, I am just desperate to work with him again. I don't know if the feeling's mutual, but I'm going to make it happen.
He said that you had this undying bromance, which I totally get. You're both very lovely. And he said that for you, he really admired your confidence in the quality of the material, which it comes off the screen, to be honest, and willingness to be collaborative, and curious to explore and be a little spontaneous. I find that really, look, with all due respect to all of you, I find that hard to believe. I always figure as a layperson that everything's so laid out and so planned out, you have to hit every note. And yet, if you're on set exploring spontaneity, I mean, how does that work as producer and creator? Are you, is that something that you like to do on your projects?
It's very easy. Honestly, I don't know how to do it other than to be collaborative. And the reason that I have choice, it's a have to, because I know my shortcomings and I am extraordinarily honest about my shortcomings, and the list of my shortcomings are plentiful. And so, my mentor many years ago said something to me when early in my career, I had an ego that was unrelenting. And I had fallen victim to this idea that the showrunner needs to be the king or the queen, right? That everyone just bows down and does what that person says. And actually my mentor said the exact opposite. He said that the truth of the matter is that if you're doing your job correctly, then you are definitely not the smartest one, and you are definitely not the most talented one. And you need to be able to check your ego at the door and let people do their jobs. And that doesn't mean that you're not still guiding things. That doesn't mean that you take everything everybody says, but it means that before you say no, you step away and you give it a good thought. And when you're dealing with people like Josh and Slater and Anna Sophia and Grace and Dominic and Alec, and then on the musical side, Atticus Ross and Leopold Ross, and you're dealing, like, my editors were amazing, my sound design team was amazing, my production designer, my costumer, everyone was top of the game. You would be a fool not to listen to them. And too often, I think that some people in my position are foolish, and they just think that they have to be the answer to everything. And I think that's short-sighted, but B, I also think it takes away from what is most brilliant about television, which is the ability to be able to be collaborative and to be able to work with people who are better than you to bring a whole together. One of the things I say, and this is the last thing I'll say to this, I say to young writers who are falling into the same trap that I fell into when I was young, I say, look, at the end of the day, the created by is still your name. And the final product is all that matters. It doesn't matter how you got there. It doesn't matter whose idea it was. It just matters in the final product. And that was just, I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't had my mentor, and thank God for him, because he's a good man and a good leader.
That's incredible. It's great when you're mentored by someone like that. I feel the same way. A good leader knows his or her weaknesses, and is able to take the best of everybody and elevate and make something really special. And it also shows a confidence and a self-worth that you don't have to have everything your way. Which will bring us to this. So that Dr. Death blurs the lines between, you know, the horror story and also this man. And the Girl From Plainville does the same thing. You know, that she's got this strange fantasy world, and it blurs the lines between that and reality. And she's not exactly a monster either, right? So Elle Fanning recently told me that it took her a while to crack the code to play her. And so on both projects, how do you tackle that with your lead actor when they need a way in, and it's been written intentionally ambiguous and nuanced? That must be quite challenging. Does it take a long time to get to the right tone?
So first of all, you know, I have been nothing but lucky to have had these two number ones on the call sheet. You know, I will be the last person to disagree with Elle, but I will say that if she struggled to find it, then she struggled it late in the night, well beyond closed doors, and not being witnessed by anybody, you know, behind the scenes or on set. Elle, you know, when Elle and I first met, back in 2019 about that, with Liz Hannah, who's the co-creator and the co-showrunner of the show. You know, she had a pretty good handle on who that character was going to be even back then, before we had written a stitch of the show. You know, to answer your question, you know, we spend a lot of time analyzing the scripts together, right? And that's a part of the process, no matter who the character is. If you've got an actor worth his or her salt, which we had in spades with Elle Fanning, with Josh, Chloe Sevigny, Slater, right, on and on and on and on, then they're going to want to drill down, right? They're not just going to say the words, and that was what both Elle and Josh did with us separately, different shows, every single day. And it just meant sometimes the words on the page that we had written were too obtuse, and we had to figure out a way to shine a little light on it. And sometimes the words on the page just were not good, and they were able to help guide us to finding the good words. But I think that at the end of the day, for both Josh and Elle, you know, not being fully aware of what their process is, because that's their process, I have to imagine that it always begins with their own personal research into who these people really were. And then with our hopefully gently guiding hands, because we probably know a little bit more because we have months more of experience in sort of diving into the story, that we can just sort of nudge them in the direction that we think that they'll want to be. But at the end of the day, I think that Liz would agree with me as it relates to Elle, and I can say as the showrunner of Dr. Death, with Josh, I sort of just held on tight and watched them do their thing.
That's incredible. You know, yeah, I don't get me wrong, I love watching shows where it's just about a monster and they're horrible and they kill people, and I'm like, okay, this is cool, I'm into this. But what I really, and I said to you, I think I said this to you offline, what I really appreciated about these projects that you've put out there into the world is that we start to learn about psychology, and it's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more gray, not so black and white. And I really love living in that space. It's actually really compelling for me as the viewer. So I'm just wondering, Josh said to me when he finished the shooting of the show that he felt 200 pounds lighter, like he was weary in his bones. And I thought that was really fascinating that he said that, because a lot of actors like to say, no, I can just brush it off. But he was really honest. I wonder if that affects you as well as the writer, creator, the showrunner. You've been in it, you understand the psychology, you're trying to bring something to life that is different. So what happens after production or even post-production? Do you feel weary in your bones as well about that kind of subject matter?
100%. I and look, I will be equally honest as Josh was with you, and just say that I'm taking a little bit of a break from true crime right now. The next two and a half projects. I say that because the third one isn't nailed down yet. But the next 2.5 projects have absolutely nothing to do with true crime, because it was a very fulfilling, for sure, last 3 years. I am immensely grateful for the last 3 years, both in terms of the opportunity that I had to tell these stories, or to be a part of telling these stories, and with the people that I had the opportunity to tell them with. But going from Dr. Death for basically 2 years, and during COVID with the lockdowns and being away from my family for the better part of a year, to right into Girl From Plainville, which, again, I was away from my family for the better part of at least 6 months. And living in these sort of darker worlds with this dark psychology, you have, if you're human, and if you feel empathy, which again is the ultimate goal, I think, of that for me, of telling these stories, is that audiences would catch themselves feeling empathy for these two people, which is a hard thing to do, and sometimes a disturbing thing to land in a world where you're like, oh, I sort of feel for them. That makes you check yourself. It's exhausting. And so, yeah, I understand where Josh, I can't even begin to imagine what Josh went through or what Elle went through, having to actually live in these characters. But living in the world was tough. Yeah. I'm looking forward to a little bit of lighter storytelling in the future.
Yeah, I think you should go and produce an episode of like RuPaul's Drag Race, or go and do a children's animated feature or something. I don't know, because that's a lot. It's a lot, and you're creating something. Obviously, it's art, but you're a human being, and that's obviously got to have an impact on you. You're also doing courtroom drama, by the way. That's a staple of television that many viewers just love to death. And I think the courtroom stuff on both shows is really effective, particularly in Dr. Death. I found that so riveting, and I was so satisfied when it ended. So hopefully you were happy with the way that turned out too.
I was. Well, look, I want to give a shout out again to Liz Hannah, because she directed the courtrooms episodes of Girl From Plainville 6 and 7, and those are not easy things to shoot and make them feel novel, for lack of a better word, right? Make them feel fresh, and she did a maestro job of it. And those were her first 2 episodes of television ever. So, I give her a shout out on that. And I will absolutely say, as it relates to Dr. Death, it was that episode 8 was the one that I was most afraid of the entire season, because I didn't want people to be bored. I wanted to find a way to make it feel fresh as well. And that was one of the primary driving reasons for why we didn't show any viscera, or very little viscera, in episodes 1 through 7, was solely so that we were packing that powder to be able to let those surgery scenes where we finally let the camera see everything that was happening, let them land, and let people feel like they were being pulled through this courtroom episode, and not feeling like they were just like sort of sitting back. We were trying to grab them by the throat and pull them through. And that was very strategic from 2 years before we even rolled cameras.
That's fascinating, because the whole time we don't see a lot, and of course what's going on in your mind is almost more terrifying than what you're seeing. And then of course then you reveal it all in the final episode, and I mean, it was something. It was a lot.
Listen, props to 2 people who are not named Jackson or Slater or Gummer or Rob, to our sound design team, and to Atticus Ross, Leopold Ross, and Nick Chuba, because that was carefully, and I urge anybody who watches this, if they're going to end up tuning into Dr. Death, or if they already have and they want to watch it again, if you've got 5.1 surround sound, watch the show in 5.1 surround sound, because the sound design is meticulous, and the balancing act between the sound design and the score is it took us months in the edit to get that balance right. So, it's something that's sometimes overlooked, because you look at the fancy things, you look at the actors, you look at the directors,
of course,
the writing, who knows, but you look at least those 2 things, right? But sound design on that show is stunning, and the score is absolutely
The score
Next
is
level.
off the charts, next level, and Kat Westergaard's DP work is beautiful. All female directing team. Like I could rave about this show forever. I won't. You've got 2 Critics' Choice nominations for 2 of your actors. I hope we get to see some of you on the Emmys red carpet, mate. Thank you so much. Congratulations on some really strong work, mate. Really, congratulations.
Thank you very much for the kind words. Thank you for the time. I hope we have the opportunity to see each other in the future. Yeah.
Absolutely.